Hey guys, welcome back. Just a reminder, tickets are on sale for our conference next May 22nd through the 25th in Grafton, Illinois. Once again, we're really excited about that. If you want to join us, go to the link below, journeytotruthcon.com, and all the information is there. There's live stream tickets available as well for $99. Come hang out with us. We're really looking forward to it. Just a reminder, guys, we have a new Hopewell Farm CBD promo code JTTNEW, gets you 20% off through the end of the year, all their products. That link is below as well. And as always, we have the Omnia Radiation Balancer, a patch you put on any radiating device, harmonizes the frequency, the harmful EMF coming in, and actually balances your energy field and turns that frequency into something beneficial for you instead of harmful. So really great technology. You get 10% off all their products with promo code TRUTH, all caps. So today we are going to talk about giants. We have Floyd Wills here with us, who wrote an incredible book, and Aaron and him actually met. Have a really weird story how they met. The book's called "The Red-Haired Giants of Lovelock Cave and Other Ancient Mysteries." Yeah. I mean, it covers not just giants, but dwarves, ETs.
Yeah, you cover a lot more than giants.
ETs, right. Tall whites, reptilians. You get into everything. But why don't you go ahead and tell the story how you guys met and how we're even here today?
Right. So, as many of you know, I was living in Portland, Oregon for about a year. And I was eating at a Indian buffet called Namaste with my roommate. And we were just talking about stuff, and Floyd overheard us talking and came up and was just like, "Hey, I just want to say, I don't remember what you said exactly, but
oh yeah, you guys totally caught my attention. You were talking about the whole pandemic and everything what was going on, and I was there with my sons, and I just overheard you guys, and I was like, oh my gosh, these people are awake. It reminded me of the movie They Live, and when they would wear the sunglasses, right?
I'm like, movie.
these people have their sunglasses on. My goodness. So I'm like, yeah. I was a little nervous at first, but I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go over there, introduce myself, and just say hello. And it led to this. Yeah.
Thanks for having me on. And you didn't even know I had a podcast.
No, I didn't. No, right. You had your shirt on.
I was wearing a shirt. Yeah,
I was wearing a shirt, but I didn't notice it. And then you were like, in the conversation, like, "Oh yeah, I've got a podcast, Journey to Truth." And I'm like, "Well, how could I find it?" And you like get up and you turn around and you show me the back of your shirt.
Right. I remember that. Yeah. And I didn't know you wrote a book or that you were a researcher. So that was.
I was right in the process of doing the formatting on it. I had already written the book, but. Nice. Yeah, I was going through that process, and yeah, it's amazing how when you just connect with people, have a conversation, reach out, what it could lead to. This is incredible. Here I am on your guys' show. I mean, this is amazing.
And that's why I wanted to tell that story. The importance of just being vocal, opening your mouth, talking about this stuff, speaking your truth, and you literally attract the things in your life that you're supposed to come across.
Especially in Portland, because there's always in the back of my mind, like, what if somebody gets mad hearing what we're talking about and like tries to fight me in the parking lot or who knows?
Absolutely.
But the opposite happened with you.
Opposite happened. It's incredible. Just the I don't know if you want to call it synchronicity, attraction, whatever. It's just incredible, like how a conversation could end up, and here we are. And I thank you guys for having me on your show. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank your audience as well. So
yeah, we're looking forward to this.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Like I said earlier, your book covers so much about giants and everything. I mean, you've done some extensive research into this topic, and I want to start with the main topic of the book, the red-haired giants of Lovelock Cave. For our audience who doesn't know that story, would you mind kind of giving us a background of the story and the history of that?
Yeah, absolutely. That story comes from the Northern Paiute. And in their oral tradition, they speak of a tribe of red-haired giants. And they have various names of these giants. One of them was Satika, which means tule eater. Tule is like a water plant. And the area where these giants lived, there was a giant lake, and it was very marshy at that particular time in history. And they would fish, and they would use these tule plants, and they would weave basketry and make boats and things like that. So they've been in the Paiute history for a long time. They were cannibalistic giants. They weren't a nice tribe. They would actually attack the other surrounding tribes, and they would eat the other tribal members. Finally, the Paiute got tired. They had waged war on these giants for a number of years, and they banded together and they cornered the last of the giants at Lovelock Cave. And they threw brush in front of the cave, and they shot flaming arrows and burnt the giants to death. Now, some of the Paiutes believe not all of them were killed. Some of them escaped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read that part. They said, some secret escape or
some secret escape. Yes.
And so this isn't just some tale. They've actually discovered the bones, discovered the artifacts, and uncovered them. They were buried in 5 to 6 feet of back guano.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll get a little bit into the backstory of that. But that's why this particular story intrigued me so much, was because there was a lot of evidence. There's actual artifacts that came out of the cave and skeletal remains, most of which disappeared. However, some of the skulls did end up in a small museum, a Humboldt museum in Winnemucca. And that museum had them for decades, but they kept them in cupboards in the basement. They never put them on public display. And if you wanted to actually view these skulls, you had to ask to view them. They're no longer there. But the whole backstory of this, originally the cave was, the artifacts and the giants were discovered in 1911 by 2 guano miners. Guano was basically bat poop, and it was used as fertilizer. And so these 2 miners went into Lovelock Cave and discovered artifacts and giant mummies. That was in 1911. One of those who made the discovery, his name was John Reed, and he actually knew about the legend of the red-haired giants from when he was a teenager. He was friends with a Native American who was a son of Chief Winnemucca. His name was Natchez. And one time at John's family farm, the horses got out, and they went to retrieve the horses. And this went on for days and days trying to track down these horses. They ended up camping outside of Lovelock Cave, and it was raining out. And John was like, well, why don't we just go in that cave and take shelter? And Natchez says, no, we're not going in there, because the spirits of the red-haired giants haunt that cave. And then he relayed to John the story of the red-haired giants and how they were cannibalistic, they were evil, and how his ancestors had killed them off. And basically their spirits haunted that cave. So John had an interest in archaeology from when he was very young, and he knew about the red-haired giants. So it was kind of ironic that he heard the story of the giants and actually went in the cave to try to explore it when he was a teenager, and just found piles of bat poop and nothing else, and left. But then later, as an adult, he would go back into that cave, and they would make that discovery of these tall red-haired mummies and artifacts. So it was a real interesting story how it went full circle. So he knew about the legend, and he actually was an amateur archaeologist himself and had a lot of curiosity about the giants.
And the most curious thing to me is that the old newspaper articles that covered all of this stuff, I just saw on a little mini documentary I was watching that there have been up to 1,500 newspaper articles written about the discovery of giant skeletons dating all the way back to the 1800s. What happened to 50? I've read some of these articles myself. Mm-hmm. And then now there's just no record of them, not even in the Smithsonian, which in the book you refer to the Smithsonian Gate. And I would like you to explain what that is for our audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Smithsonian Gate is just the whole concept of what I call knowledge filtration. And it's basically, if something doesn't fit in what you've been taught or what your ideology you're teaching, it's just simply filtered out. You don't even acknowledge it. And so there's a question that many researchers have. Well, is there like a big conspiracy by the Smithsonian to like hide the stuff? Or is it more like they just have this knowledge filtration, like it doesn't fit into our paradigm? So if we come across a giant skeleton, we'll just write it off and just, stick it in a box somewhere in a warehouse, Right. So that's open to debate. Is there some big conspiracy, or is it knowledge filtration? And, I think there's many individuals that have made discoveries like this, archaeologists, paleontologists, but they feared about their career. Like if they really came forward, brought this to the public, what would happen to them? What would happen to their career? And I actually give a specific example of that in the book of a lady, Virginia Steen McIntyre. who was doing some dating on an archaeological site in Mexico. And she reported what she honestly found and said, this site shows human habitation going back, 200, possibly 200,000 years.
Right.
And that would totally rewrite North American history. And she was brave enough to come forward. Well, she was ostracized. She lost her career, and she's never been involved in paleontology, archaeology since that point.
Right. And
so it's a religion, basically, too.
Yeah. It is.
You go against the religion, you're ostracized.
Yes, you're ostracized. And there was a thing called the Powell Doctrine when the Smithsonian was first founded. And basically, John Wesley Powell, he was a really influential man in the field of archaeology. And he basically came forward and said, if there's any discovery of pre-Columbian artifacts in America, it just can't be. And it's either have been planted or misidentified. Fake. It must be fake. It must be fake. So from a very early point in our history here in America, it's been taught in the universities that if there's any kind of pre-Columbian discoveries here in America, doesn't matter how much evidence that you have, it doesn't fit with our paradigm. So it just simply, it's not true.
Yeah. I mean, but you're talking 200,000 years old. That's one account. I've read some other articles that talked about skeletons in New Mexico dating 25,000 to 50,000 years ago. Now, I want to put this into perspective. Graham Hancock's new show, Ancient Apocalypse, he's trying to argue that these sites are even 10 to 12,000 years old. And that people came and wrapped their head around that. But we have evidence dating back possibly as far as 200,000 years
way
ago.
older than that.
Way older.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's an interesting point you bring up. I love Graham Hancock. He's one of my heroes. Fingerprints of the Gods was one of his first books I read. Right, yeah. But in my book, I actually cite an archaeological discovery in San Diego that happened in the 90s. There was some road construction work going on, and they uncovered the bones of a mastodon. And so they called in their archaeologists, paleontologists. They're looking at this thing, and the bones had been broken up. And the marrow, it looks like the marrow was gone from the bone. So some intelligent being sucked the marrow out of the bones. And there were stone cobbles next to the bones that were made. They were made by an intelligent being to break the bones to suck the marrow out. Well, here's the kicker. They dated the mastodon bones to be at probably 120,000 years old, right? Give or take 10,000 years. And the researchers on the sites basically saying, hey, we have solid evidence that there were hominids in North America over 100,000 years ago. And they could have been Neanderthals. They could have been Denisovans. Who knows what they could have been? They were intelligent hominid species that were smart enough to make tools.
Right. Exactly. And that goes back to the cover-up, because the evidence is concrete in some cases. And I've heard a whistleblower, and I'm sorry, guys, I don't remember his name. It was an old interview I watched. Apparently, he worked for the Smithsonian, and he said in some cases they would actually destroy the evidence.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of cases like that as well. And I recently got in contact with a researcher that knew the old curator at the Humboldt Museum where those skulls were originally that came out of Lovelock Cave, and she claims that the old curator had revealed to her that the Smithsonian came in and they took everything out of there. They took them all out. Yeah. Now, when the museum to look at the skulls to go view them, they told me, those were repatriated back to the Native Americans. Okay, which I thought was weird because NAGPRA was enacted in the 1990s, right? And these skulls had been there for at least 50 years. So this was long before all the political stuff, and they were kept in the basement and you couldn't even see them. So if this had to do with NAGPRA, well, NAGPRA was enacted in the 90s, but they've been there for 50 years.
Right.
And so something's not adding up. It's not making sense to me.
Well, yeah, and then you have Abraham Lincoln claiming to see, he saw giants. It's even
at Niagara, right? He mentioned something about the eyes of those extinct giants.
Yeah, and then there's apparently information out there that he was brought to under one of these mounds in North America and shown some giant skeletons
in Ohio.
I believe Ohio. Yeah,
Ohio.
And
a lot of those skeletons.
Apparently, his name's even like autographed so there's like an entrance that goes into underneath one of these mounds, and apparently his name is like carved in the stone, like as it used to be almost like a tourist site.
Not just him, but a bunch
of other people. It's hilarious to me that we have to even fight for this truth to get out there.
Well, absolutely. But if you see what's going on now in our society with all the like the matrix we live in, with a cover up with just the current things going on, it's just they've been doing that with our ancient history. They've been covering things up. You know, if you control the past, you know, you can control the present.
Exactly.
Control the future, right?
And I don't know how accurate this number is. So there's a documentary about giants on Gaia TV. And I forgot what it's actually called, but it's about ancient giants. And they said by 1920, somewhere it's documented that in North America, they found over 3,000, I think like 3,781 giant skeletons by 1920.
Yeah,
that's a massive number to just erase.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. It would not surprise me. I mean, I just started compiling a giant file, like looking up these old newspaper articles, and I'm like, this is crazy, like reading some of these articles, and sure, maybe there were some misidentified bones, sure, maybe there were a couple of hoaxes, but the more and more articles I found these really strange consistencies, like massive jaw bones, in some case double rows of teeth. You know, just these little subtleties that were connecting. I'm like, oh, that other article mentioned this weird anomaly, and here this other discovery is making a similar statement.
Right.
And this was obviously long before internet or anything where a hoax could just, you know, go worldwide in a click of a mouse. This was before all that.
And that's the Cahokia Mound site is only 25 minutes from us, and there's an old newspaper article where they found 2 skeletons with double rows of teeth.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just was out to Cahokia probably a couple years ago. It was absolutely amazing. Nice. But yeah, in my book too, I also get into the anomalies like the double rows of teeth. And in fact, it's mentioned in the Bible. There's a giant in the Bible who is one of the brothers of Goliath, who had a double row of teeth and 6 digits on each hand and on each foot. And David and his warriors, they killed him off, but it makes specific reference to a giant with those anomalies.
And in Chaco Canyon, there are depictions of 6-toed footprints and handprints carved in the walls in some of the, and that part's closed off to the public.
And that part's closed off. And I actually, in my book, I referenced that, talking about the Anasazi and some of their oral history of the giants. And they just like what you had referenced, Tyler, with the handprints, the 6 digits. And I think I've seen some too, like in Utah, that if you notice the big hands that have the 6 digits, they are much bigger, or the feet that have 6 digits, they're much bigger than the ones that have 5. They have like a little hand with 5 digits, and they have this giant hand with 6 digits.
Yeah.
Like what are the odds of that? Also in Lovelock Cave, there are some researchers, M.K. Davis and Don Monroe. They discovered a huge handprint in Lovelock Cave. It was immense. And in fact, I have a photograph of it in my book where Don's got like some big, like a Bowie knife, and he's holding it up to the handprint. And it's massive. It's probably 10 times the size of a normal hand. And then they came back, I don't know how many months later, and that handprint was completely gone. It was like it was gone.
It was erased.
It was erased.
What do you think, or do you know what the tallest documented skeleton ever found was that we could say is pretty solid?
Most of the ones that I came across in my articles were, you know, 8, the tall ones, maybe 8 to 9 feet. There was a reference, and this is crazy. This was in Pennsylvania, of a alleged 16-foot tall giant found underneath a burial mound, and it had the armor. It said in the article, it had a giant helmet and armor like those found in the ancient city of Nineveh, and it had a sword supposedly 9 feet in length.
Yeah,
I couldn't find any more information on that. It could have been a hoax, but you know what? With the Smithsonian coming in and confiscating everything, if something like that was found, I mean, certainly they're not going to go stick it in a local museum. They're gonna haul it out, just like in Indiana Jones. Oh, what happened to the Ark? Oh, we got our top men working on it, and it's all crated up along with all the other crates.
And well, in the book you mentioned,
never to be seen again.
And I could be wrong, but I thought in the book you mentioned something about a 25-foot tall skeleton in Peru, maybe.
Actually, I think there was a huge one, like over 20 feet. And I think that was here in North America in the desert. And I think it wasn't, I don't remember if it was a full skeleton, but it was like a leg bone. And this was in the 1800s. And some local physicians looked at it and they said, this is the longest femur bone we've ever found.
Right.
So, and then that would match up with some of these footprints, like the footprint that Michael Tillinger is standing next to, that's like on the wall. I mean, that's ancient.
Is that in South Africa?
Yeah, in Africa. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. And speaking of footprint, a couple references in my book, one sandal, a Thule sandal that came out of Lovelock Cave, allegedly worn by a red-haired giant, was 17 inches long. So if you have a 17-inch long sandal, and actually that information was sent to me by an anthropologist. I was actually in communication with an anthropologist at the Nevada State Museum, and he was providing me some interesting information on the red-haired giants, but I started asking too many questions and the communication just stopped. But I did include some of our dialogue. It was very interesting, but it was a 17-inch sandal that came out of the cave. That translates into about a shoe size of 29. That's a big foot.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's take this back even further to in the book you mentioned dinosaurs and possible reptilian humanoids.
Yeah.
And there's depictions of these even in old books with dinosaurs, right?
Yeah.
And well, go ahead. Explain what you found there.
Yeah, it was so interesting because I remember as a kid, it was, I was doing my research into this. I actually traveled to Mexico. I met a gentleman over there, and he was actually a big inspiration for me writing the book. His name was Dr. Charles Spurgeon. He passed away probably 5 years ago, but he had sent me some writings on the Nephilim. He was a theologian. He was a ufologist. Just a really interesting guy. I just loved how open-minded he was. And he was living in Mexico at the time, but he had lived in other parts. He lived in Honduras and did a lot of research into the Mayans. But at any rate, so I met up with him. He took me to some archaeological sites in Mexico. And one place he took me to was a museum. It was in a town called Acámbaro. And they have all these figurines of dinosaurs, and some of them look like ancient Egyptian sarcophaguses, ancient Sumerians, like just this weird collection of these ceramic figures that were discovered in the 1940s by a gentleman named Waldemar Julesrud. He was a local businessman in that area of Mexico, and he was an amateur archaeologist, so he loved that kind of stuff. He was out horseback riding one day. He looked down at the ground and he saw something protruding out of the ground, and got off his horse, picked it up, and he started finding these little strange figurines. And so he hired some of the locals to go dig these things up, and they were bringing him thousands of these dinosaur-looking things, humanoid-looking things, reptilian-looking things. He became obsessed with them, and his house literally got filled up with these figurines. And so at any rate, Charles took me to this museum to look at some of these ancient figurines. And I'm sure you guys have heard of Charles Hapgood.
I've heard of him.
Have you heard of him? Yeah, he actually did some research he went to Mexico and wanted to see if these were real. These figurines if they came from an ancient culture, an unrecognized culture. And his research into that, he determined that they were legit, that these were ancient figurines. And so the question is, how did these ancient peoples know what dinosaurs look like and were able to make these figurines and depict them? It was a huge question. So it got me thinking, like, wow, this is really, really strange. And I don't know if you've heard of the Ica stones of Peru.
Possibly. I'm sure I have.
I want to say I have.
Okay, and so those are in the book too. Those are stones that have depictions of dinosaurs with human interaction and all kinds of weird things. They have a stone that shows like these ancient peoples doing like open heart surgery. One of them that has like with a telescope. So just things on these ancient stones that shouldn't be there. These depictions, according to our history, they shouldn't be there. The dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago, right? So how could our ancestors, have interacted, let alone recorded this? So I just started bringing this together and going, this is strange. There's a lot of weird things happening in this particular area of Peru. And then I went to this museum and saw all these strange depictions of dinosaurs. And then I saw I came across the Nazca mummies, and some of those mummies are from Peru and they look reptilian. And it triggered a memory when I was a kid. I had a book on dinosaurs, and I remember there was a depiction of, they called it a dinosaurid, and it was this scientist in Canada. He speculated, he's like, oh, if the dinosaurs didn't all die off 65 million years ago, some of them would have evolved into almost like a humanoid being. And so he had a statue made, and it had elongated head, big eyes. It had 3 fingers on its hands, and it happens to look just like one of the Nazca mummies that was found in like 2010 or 2017, excuse me.
Right, and he got ridiculed for that speculation.
He got ridiculed for that, but I have a picture of that depiction of the dinosaur, and you can look at it. And I have some photos that I got permission from the Inacari Institute in Peru that actually has those mummies. They said I can put it in my book, and you could look at, I think it's one of the mummies. I think it was Maria is what they call her. And you can look at that picture and look at the dinosaurid picture and look at just how similar they are.
Right. And obviously we hear the tales of reptilians, ruling the world and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Which there's definitely something to that. But there's even, I think you can even Google an image of a dinosaur footprint next to a human footprint fossilized.
There was one of those found in Texas.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of those found in Texas.
Even on Google, I don't know what their mainstream explanation is for that, but
yeah, I think it's Biloxi, Texas. And in fact, my late friend, Dr. Charles Spurgeon, I think he had sent me a picture one time where he was looking at that. He was studying that. But yeah, how do you explain it? I mean, you have an anatomically correct human footprint next to a dinosaur track. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it.
They lived at the same time. That's how you...
Right.
Right. Yeah.
It's pretty obvious to me.
Occam's razor on that one, right? I mean, It looks pretty apparent.
Our history is not what we've been told.
It's not
at all.
That's why we're rewriting it right now today.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So where do the elongated skulls fit into this picture?
Well, that's something that I was just very fascinated with. And when I started getting into the section on the ET races and start talking about the grays and, the tall whites and the reptilians, on the section on the grays, a lot of them have been described as having more of an elongated head and the big eyes, skinny little bodies and whatnot. And I'd always been intrigued with cranial deformation because that's been practiced since ancient times throughout a variety of different cultures. And I thought to myself, well, that is so weird. Like, what would make someone say, to their wife, like, hey, let's just elongate Junior's head,
Right.
just to like, okay, let's give him this weird look, right? So could it be that, or could it be like these ancient peoples had some interaction with beings that had elongated heads, that had some, they were either advanced technologically, they had a much higher civilization, and they looked at them as being like gods. And so what is the best form of flattery?
Exactly.
Is imitation. Is imitation. They were like, wow, we want to be like these things, so we want to look like these things. Yeah. And so you get into the concept of the cradle boarding, where they would strap the board to the head, and or they would take a cloth and they would bind the head. But there are some of these skulls in Peru, they've analyzed them, they haven't been artificially elongated. They were that way naturally. And while we're on the subject, this is part of my personal collection. This is from Peru. This is not a real authentic skull, but this is a casting of one of the Peruvian skulls. And you can see just how elongated the skull is. Turn it from sideways. And on the back of the skull, it's different from a Homo sapien. There's what's in our skulls, there's what's called a sagittal suture, which they said looks like a bow and arrow. So this curvature here is like the bow, and there should be a suture going up this way to symbolize the arrow. But if you look on this skull, you just see the bow, you don't see the other suture here.
There's no middle suture.
Right? There's no middle suture. So it's different. In fact, some of the ancient skulls over there, particularly in the Ica region of Peru, they actually some of them have 2 holes in the back of their skull. And experts have looked at this and said, wow, that's like a natural thing. That's like an evolutionary process to have these holes. So their heads were so big, so the blood flow could circulate in such big heads.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And this is not just Peru. This was global, in my opinion.
It's global. It's absolutely global. All over. Native Americans did it. The ancient Sumerians did it. I mean, it was practiced on Europeans did it. That really intrigued me. And when I started looking at the Nazca mummies and seeing some of the elongated skulls, I'm looking at these things and they're claiming like these are natural. These aren't artificially elongated. So I'm thinking, wow, if these are real, then this would make sense that these peoples had interactions with other cultures, other civilizations, and they wanted to be like these people. So they wanted to make their heads like that.
Right. And the good thing, going back to Graham Hancock's show, Ancient Apocalypse, the good thing about that is, for one, it's, forcing people to think outside of the box. 2, there isn't one episode where he doesn't mention giants, although he refers to everything as folklore, myth, and legend.
Yes.
Not really, he hasn't connected those dots yet. Regardless, it's planting the seed of giants. And this tells us that worldwide, all these cultures were talking about living among the giants.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And think about it, like, dinosaurs were once roaming this planet. I mean, giant lizards, were roaming this planet. Here's another thing from my collection. This is a recreation of a jawbone of a Gigantopithecus, of a giant ape that goes back 2 million years to probably 350,000 years ago. This thing was running around. Some of our ancient ancestors had interactions with it, probably the Denisovans, certainly Homo heidelbergensis did. These things were almost 10 feet tall. To give you some perspective, I don't know if you could see it. This is my mouthpiece I use when I practice martial arts. And this is the jawbone of one of these things to give you the perspective of how big these things are. Massive. And we're not even getting into the whole concept of Sasquatch and things like that. I mean, there's so much stuff that we just have not been told and that we really don't have answers for. But it certainly pokes a lot of holes in the dam of knowledge suppression that academics have put before us.
Right. And I would argue that and say that we do have answers for a lot of it, actually.
We do, yes.
We do, not like
right. Yeah.
You're not gonna get it from the matrix system that's controlled and manipulated.
And there's
an agenda there, and the agenda is not to inform you of the truth. I'm sorry, it's just not.
It's not
at all.
It's how do you control people? You control people with fear, and you keep them ignorant. You keep them dumbed down, and you keep them afraid. And those are very good tools for manipulation.
Exactly.
And my favorite part about doing research on these types of subjects is that, I firmly believe that once we start, we become guided. We're guided to the next piece of information that we need, because this literature is out there, these photographs, this evidence is everywhere. And once you go down that rabbit hole, once you start digging, you're led to the next piece. And you find things that if you went back 2 years later to try and find again, you have no idea how you got to that piece of information. So it's really curious how I feel like, we're being helped. We're being guided to help uncover this truth.
100%. And this conversation right now is proof of that.
Right.
Absolutely. 100%. Mm-hmm. I have a gentleman at my church. He's a scientist, and I lent my book to a buddy at my church, and I was a little nervous, like what he would think about it. And he's like, "I love this, Floyd," and he's starting to lend it out. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's like trying to promote me. And he gives it to this guy at my church who's a scientist.
Yeah.
And I just get a text from him. He goes, Floyd, I'm really interested in your book. I read your book. I want to meet for coffee to talk.
Great.
Right. So who knows what kind of conversation? Is he going to say, maybe I need to be in a padded room? Hey, maybe. And I'm okay. I'm a big boy. You know, I'm like, hey, everyone's got their opinions. Or is he going to find some things in there that really intrigued him? Right. Really intrigued him. And we might have some very good conversation.
That's what's so important about your book and the work that you're doing, because, you know, on this show, we just jump straight into deep end most of the time.
Yeah.
We've already accepted a lot of this stuff as truth, and we skip the beginner level stuff. We get, you know, but your book bridges that gap. And it presents it in a way to where a scientist or anyone can pick it up and digest it and be like, wow, okay, there's actually something to this. And that's extremely crucial right now, because we're not just going to get there. People want to see how you got to your conclusions.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why it was really important to me. I wanted to write the book in a way that was entertaining for people, especially people that weren't familiar with these types of subjects, where they would be able to kind of follow along and I wouldn't lose them. But on the other end too, I wanted to write it in an academic form, as if I was writing a college paper. So I wanted to cite all my sources. I wanted to leave breadcrumbs for people that are really interested to pick up on what I've done and to look, and you might find things that I missed. You might go down a rabbit hole and come up with things that I didn't even look at. So I wanted to leave a breadcrumb.
And your table of contents is incredible. I mean, it's all like you have sub chapters within the chapters. It's all broken down. So it's a great reference guide too. I mean, you don't have to, it's very easily to pick that book up and find what you're looking for.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. That's kind of what I was hoping.
And it actually led me down a rabbit hole, which we'll get into in a little bit. But I want to talk about something you mentioned in the book, and that's ancient genetic engineering.
Oh, yeah. Yes,
because that's how we're here, in my opinion.
How we're here. Yeah, it's very interesting. And when I was first exposed to that, actually back when I was in high school, a buddy gave me a copy of von Daniken's book, Chariots of the Gods.
I have that book.
And I love how he wrote that book, because he raises a lot of questions. He's not like saying, okay, this is how it is. He's just bringing all this stuff up and asking some really great questions. And so I kind of wanted to use that format when I wrote my book. And then years and years later, I was led to the works of Zecharia Sitchin, who I found very fascinating on his work on the ancient Sumerian culture. And of course, he talks about the Anunnaki and how the Sumerians believe the Anunnaki, you know, they came to the earth. They were here to mine gold. And they mixed their DNA with the primitive hominids on this planet, and they genetically engineered us. That's what the Sumerians believed. So that was my first exposure to the genetic engineering piece. But also, too, when I started looking at the book of Enoch, there was mention referencing in there and how it talks about the watchers, who were basically the angels that were supposed to watch over us and protect us. A group of 200 of them made a pact together to basically say, hey, these women are really good looking. Let's go have a good time. We'll have sex with these women and bear kids, and whatever the consequences, we'll bear them. And so allegedly this group of angels had sexual unions with the human women, and they bore giants, the Nephilim. The Nephilim is a Proto-Hebrew word meaning fallen ones. Right. And then also they taught humankind the arts of war, astrology, astronomy, herbalism, all these different arts, right? That just maybe, and I raise the question, well, maybe humankind wasn't quite ready for all that. And maybe they kind of jumped the gun, and it's like given a 10-year-old car keys, credit cards, a bottle of whiskey and a gun, right? It's going to lead to no good. And so in the book of Enoch, it talks about the giants were just ravaging the land. They were destroying everything. They were killing humans, drinking blood, destroying the earth, and they were corrupting the plants and animals. And that's what I was thinking, like, that's weird. So not only were they killing all the humans off, fighting amongst each other, but they were corrupting plants, and animals. And then I started thinking, that sounds almost like kind of genetic engineering type of stuff to me. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I just got chills when you said
Absolutely.
that, so I feel like there's something to it.
How else do
There's
you
some-
corrupt plants and animals?
How else do you corrupt? Exactly. So
Right.
it's referencing that in the book of Enoch. And then there was a study that came out, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years ago. Fleischmann, I think was his name. I think he was a German scientist, but he took, I think there was 10 Egyptian mummies, and they wanted to do DNA testing on all these mummies. And all of them, 9 of them came out normal, but there was one of them that supposedly the remains of Akhenaten, that his DNA out of all those mummies was different. It was different. And so Fleischmann looked at that and said, wow, this is weird. This looks like his DNA could have been manipulated by some advanced civilization. And he raised that possibility. And I thought that was kind of mind-blowing, because if you look at depictions of Akhenaten, what does he look like? He's got this huge elongated head. He's got this elongated head, and he's got this skinny little body, almost like a gray kind of.
Right. And I definitely believe a lot of the Egyptians and any of these people in ancient cultures, or what some would even call the demigods, I think they were ETs.
Yeah, and if you look at it, even if you look at it from a biblical perspective, if you say, okay, fallen angels came to the earth, they interbred with human beings and produced a hybrid offspring. Well, angels aren't from the earth, right? So technically, wouldn't you call them extraterrestrials? If they're not from the earth, they're ETs, right?
It's just a different term for the same thing.
It's a different term. Yeah.
Same thing. Right.
Right. And so you mentioned Akhenaten. This is not really related to giants, or maybe it is, but even in southern Illinois here, I know there's been Egyptian artifacts found in North America.
I've heard of that.
So, and whether they're legit or not, I think they are, because we know the guy who actually is holding some of them, Harry Hubbard.
Yep.
And he says academia won't recognize them. He's had some people offer him upwards of $10,000 for a stone, an artifact this size. Now, why would somebody pay that much for a hoax?
History Channel even came to him and did an episode.
Right. Yeah.
Scott Walter does a lot of that. America Unearthed.
Yeah, it's a great show. I love that.
He's a great show, and he's done extensive research on these pre-Columbian cultures coming here to America: the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, the Celts, and also even way before Scott, there's a guy named Barry Fell. If you don't know who he is, I would encourage you to look up his works. He came out with a few books. One of them was called America BC. Okay. America BC. Barry Fell. He studied ancient languages, and he was researching all these different sites in America here, where there was Egyptian script, all Phoenician evidence of Phoenicians being here. Yeah.
Right,
Barry Fell.
Barry Fell. Fell.
Okay.
So you're telling me Christopher Columbus wasn't the first one?
No, he was late on the scenes. Yeah, he was way late on the scenes. And in fact, from my research, I'd really gotten into researching the Knights Templar a number of years ago. And through my own research, there are many people that believe that he had married into a family of his father-in-law was a knight, a Grand Master of the Knights Malta, which was basically another version of the Templars. Right. And actually, his father-in-law had given him Templar maps to get to America. So the Templars had already came to America pre-Columbus. And if you want to look into that, look up the Kensington Runestone, and that's another artifact that Scott Walter has researched and authenticated. And that runestone was here long before Columbus was here.
And Oak Island is living proof that they were here.
They were here.
The amount of artifacts that they have uncovered on that island from the Knights Templar and just Europe in general, is overwhelming. It rewrites history alone.
It does.
Now, whether something's buried there, I don't know. What do you think?
I think that there was a great treasure that was there. I think it was moved. I think it was maybe kept there for a while, and whoever engineered those tunnels and everything, obviously they were very intelligent. I think they got the goods and they moved them out of there. There might be a few things left, but I think the big treasures, unfortunately, I think they're gone. I would like for them to be there.
Right.
I think
I'd like for them to find it.
I think they had advanced technology that's why they were able to create all of that in the first place. And then then it would be super easy for them to move it out of there without, right?
Well, I agree. I think there's still something there. I feel like there's still something there for them to uncover.
There might still be something.
Whether or not it's some grand treasure, who knows? I'm sure it was. If they went to that extent to bury it, then obviously it was something pretty valuable.
Right.
But
just the artifacts alone, though, that they're finding
it's verifying
what they're doing.
It's rewriting. That alone is rewriting history for the mainstream, because that's on the History Channel for the world to see. Like, okay, like the story of Columbus, like, why are we even celebrating that anymore? But in my opinion, it's also funny that they're trying to dig from the top down. Like, if there's a tunnel network, there's an entrance that's not, you know, if you're trying to get to an underground base in a mountain, you don't start digging at the top of the mountain. You look for an entrance.
Let's start digging down.
And some of those old maps, some of those old maps and literature talk about entrances at the shore to the tunnel. So I'm like, what are you guys looking here for? But it's still entertainment. But
it's a show.
It's a fun show. I haven't watched it in a long time, but you mentioned ancient technology, Aaron. And in my book, I talk about Teotihuacan, which is a city in Mexico that I went to called the place where men become gods. And if you ever get a chance to visit there, it's one of the most incredible sites, I think, ever.
I want to.
Okay, so it isn't it just it's so amazing. And there was discovered underneath that site tunnels underneath the pyramids, and a sinkhole opened up, and an archaeologist, Indiana Jones style, roped down there, had a torch, went down into these tunnels and found all kinds of artifacts. But the most interesting thing he found were these spheres that contain liquid mercury.
Mm-hmm.
They contain liquid mercury, right? And so what is the significance of that? Well, archaeologists will tell us, they use liquid mercury like as a scrying device. Like they would look in the liquid mercury and they would try to predict the future, right? Like a crystal ball kind of thing. Okay, is that possible? Well, maybe. But what I found interesting, and I talk about it in my book, is that if you get mercury so cold, if you get it to a certain point, it will produce anti-gravity properties.
Yep.
Right.
It will produce anti-gravity properties. I think on Ancient Aliens one time they did a demonstration where they had this like a magnetic track, and the guy filled like a puck, and it was with something that was equivalent to liquid mercury. They couldn't actually use liquid mercury because it was so toxic, but something equivalent to it. They got it so cold, and this thing is floating around the track.
I saw
that around and around and around, and they even put an object in front of it. And it stops and it goes around it, and it goes around and around. And they asked him, they said, well, conceivably, if you could keep this mercury at a cold enough point, could you create a craft that would produce anti-gravity properties? And in that scientist's opinion, he said, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of many methods of creating.
Right. That's just one.
That's just one.
Just one. There's lots.
Right? And what were the ancient civilizations doing with it? Well, we know. They were advanced themselves, and that's why there's those same cultures. That's why there's so many similarities all over the world. It's like, okay, the same structures here, or it could, because it might have been the same people.
With sound, you can lift objects.
Yes,
alone with sound, with frequencies.
Very true.
Right.
That's,
you got Coral Castle in Florida.
That's amazing.
You can go on Amazon and buy a little box that puts out a frequency, and something will float above it. It's like okay,
incredible.
Yeah, but so all this technology, it's kind of being trickled out, but it's being trickled out into these useless gadgets. Like it's not being integrated into our infrastructure and where we need it.
It's so true. And in fact, not only useless gadgets, but they make the gadgets to the point where they call it, I forget the term, but it's so they break down. They don't even last long. So you have to replace a planned obsolescence. Right. So the useless gadgets, and then they don't even last long. So you're constantly having to consume and consume and consume and consume. It's just such a waste.
Right. So your book doesn't just cover giants. You talk about little people.
Little people.
Dwarves, the moon-eyed people that only come out at night.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on
Absolutely. So
what you
this is
found.
wild because I was just looking at these old newspaper articles on giants, and I came across other newspaper articles on anomalous finds. And one of them that I came across was in Tennessee on a farm. Allegedly, like 75,000 of these little skeletons, these little people, no taller than 3 feet, were found on this farm. And then I started looking into it, looking into the Native American oral histories. And most of the tribes, they talk about giants and they talk about little people. So that's common in their histories as well. And then I was looking into the discovery in the early 2000s on Flores Island in Indonesia of the Flores Hobbit. Have you guys heard of that?
From your book?
From the book, and it's these little in a giant cave, Liang Bao. I'm not sure if that's how it's pronounced. This cave on this island of Flores in Indonesia, they found these little skeletons, and they were no taller than 3 feet tall. And they were intelligent. They found tools. They knew how to make fire. Their brain was smaller than a chimpanzee, but yet they were able to do all these things. And in fact, they think that they were hunting Komodo dragons. Like, how badass is that? These little people, like 3 feet tall, right? With their little spears, going after these Komodo dragons, because they actually found some remains of Komodo dragons in their cave, like they had killed them.
I mean, it's no different than a Native American hunting a mastodon, you know?
No kidding. Exactly. They just knew how to do it. They over the, the knowledge, tribal knowledge, they figured out how to do it. And then that was passed on to the younger generation.
Right.
Now you mentioned the moon-eyed people. Is that what you call them?
Yeah. They were called the moon-eyed people. That natives believed that there was a group of little people. They lived underground, and they would only come out at night because the sunlight hurt their eyes, and they had big eyes, and they would keep into the underground. And it's interesting because in a lot of Native American history, oral tradition about little people, and even about giants, a lot of them say they lived underground.
Yeah,
that's where they lived.
Correct. That's all over the world, and a lot of these cultures. I mean, it makes the most sense, actually. It's the best shelter. Yeah.
And in South America, apparently, there's countries over there that have extensive tunnel systems that go for hundreds and hundreds of miles underground.
Yeah. Have you heard of the Aleutians? I think they're called in Mexico, the little people. Aleutian.
The name sounds. Tell me more about it. The name sounds kind of familiar.
My friend was born and raised in Cancun, and he told me about this legend. If you go to Mexico, there's these altars everywhere on the side of the road. These little altars, sometimes they're big. So the whole thing is, if you don't bless your land and get permission from the Aleutians, the little people, that your land will be cursed. The job site will be cursed. Everything will go wrong. And this is like proof.
They believe that.
They don't just believe it. Like the government will even they even build an altar before they build like an airport. I mean, even like the officials recognize this, and his family members and himself and everybody he knows, they claim to literally see these things running around. Sometimes you can catch them out of the corner of your eye, and it's proven over and over again. If you don't put an altar up, like something goes wrong. That land is literally cursed. And there was a bridge at the Cancun airport that I forgot how many times the brand new bridge collapsed, like 3 or 4 times before they finally built this huge altar, and then the bridge
it didn't.
Yeah.
Wow, that is very, very fascinating. No, I haven't heard about those, but it's interesting what you're talking about because it parallels some of the things when I was researching the little people. The Native Americans gave them different names, and they said if you were disrespectful to them, like they would be mischievous, they would put a curse on you. Some of the tribes would leave out food for them, or like tobacco as like an offering to them because they didn't want to get on their bads. So that's really interesting, Tyler, to hear you tell that story, and then it kind of parallels what I came across.
And I know a few people locally that have claimed to see little people in the St. Charles area. Actually,
really?
Yeah. My dad was actually sending me texts the other day of some of his friends who claimed to have experiences with these little people.
That's where I grew up.
Yeah. So, I mean, who knows what's actually going on? And it would only make sense that they're coming from underground.
Yeah. Also, too, there was in my research in Tennessee, there was some college that when it was being built, or they were adding onto the college, they found a tunnel system underneath the college.
Yeah.
And the Native Americans in that area said the little people were in that area. And there was a person that worked at the college that claimed they found a skull of a little person, and it was actually kept on one of the professors kept it on their desk, the skull on their desk.
Wow. I mean, at this point, I can believe anything. Nothing
Right.
surprises me.
Yeah.
Something else, this is a little side note, but it just popped into my head. So have you seen a movie called Troll on Netflix? It's a brand new movie about...
I have not, but it's someone had mentioned that to me, but I have
actually
not seen
way better than you think, and it tells a history of giants. Norwegian, like giants.
Yes.
Or Norse, yeah, whatever. And it's really there's actually a lot of disclosure, in my opinion, in that movie about these ancient giants. And this one guy is a researcher, and he's done extensive research over the years, and he has a whole shack, in the middle of nowhere with all of his findings. And regardless of that, the whole point I'm trying to make is, so the king, I forgot whoever he is in the movie, the castle, the palace is built on top of what was depicted to be the giant's home, the giant's castle. And the reason they chose that location was because they said it was good luck to build on top of another king's home. Now I'm starting to think about other sites around the world. In Egypt, they say that they would come in and like deface it and rewrite history, but maybe that's not the case. Maybe they built on top of it because it was considered good luck. And then in Graham Hancock's show in Chalupa, whatever I forgot what that site is, but they found like 5 different civilizations that built on top of each other. And in my opinion, these massive sites weren't just random sites. This is like the king's home, and they were building on top of the king's home as good luck.
So true. I believe you're onto something there. And I've also heard the term ancestral worship. Like it's a spiritual site for them, and so they're going to build on top of that. And somehow some of these cultures might have rituals where they try to connect with the spirits at that site.
Yeah.
Right.
And in Chichen Itza, same thing. You have a pyramid built on top of a pyramid.
Yes.
And it's probably a vortex as well, or a ley line.
Well, the reason that area was chosen originally, probably
for that reason.
Yeah, there's probably an energetic significance.
And if they knew about that, if they had that knowledge, then
there's an island off the coast of Italy, and I think I'm going to write about this in my second book called Sardinia, and that has a lot of legends of giants on that island, and they have amazing ancient architecture on there called Cyclopean architecture, right? What is a cyclops? It was a giant with one eye. So the very term Cyclopean, architecture, is like, hey, these people, they were a big people, a race of giants built these things. But there was a culture there. They were called the Naraje, and they were a warrior culture. And what they would do is they would build on these ancient stone structures that allegedly had the burials of the giants, and they would do like their rites of passage for manhood would be at these sites. So whoever was going through this young boy that was becoming a man would go through this process, this ritual, but it was to connect with the spirit of the giant that was buried underneath them. Wow. So it kind of goes back to what you're saying, Tyler, about there's so much more purpose on these sites, building one on top of the other, like at a deeper level, at a spiritual level.
Yeah, and as soon as they said that in that movie, it clicked. I'm like, oh my God, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I'm going to check out that movie. And I've got a movie for you guys and your listeners that are interested in the whole Lovelock Cave. There's a movie that came out. It's a Western horror flick. It's called Bone Tomahawk. It's with Kurt Russell. And it's a dark horror Western. And it has to do with a tribe that is very similar to the red-haired giants, but they're called troglodytes in the movie. Really? And I'm not going to give any more away. They're not giants, but everything else about them is like the red-haired giants. But it's a very interesting movie. Yeah, it's called Bone Tomahawk with Kurt Russell. You can tell
what inspired that tale. Yeah, that's
absolutely. Like I'm thinking, like, the writers of this, they probably knew the legend of the red-haired giants.
All right. So my favorite part about your book is you go from giants to ETs, reptilians, to tall whites. Yeah. And your segment on the tall whites actually led me to a documentary that I watched Walking with the Tall Whites, and with
Yes.
Charles, is it Charles James Hall or whatever?
Hall, yes.
And he actually reached out to him already to see if we can get him on the show, by the way.
Oh, wonderful. Very cool.
But that
on Facebook.
That story is incredible. You know, he was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base in the 60s and claims to have been working with Tall Whites, and that the government's working with Tall Whites. Can you, you could probably tell that story better than I can.
Well, yeah, he just worked at this Air Force base, and he had heard rumors of some strange goings on there. And he was out at a weather shack, I believe, and kind of a remote area on the base. And he actually started to encounter these tall white beings. I think he saw a little girl, and he looked at her and is like, that's not like a human. That's not like a human child. That's something else. And then I think he saw the father come and get the child. And then he started having these interactions with these tall whites. And some of them were like, I think like 7 foot, 8 foot tall. And he said that they could communicate telepathically. He said that they could live like hundreds and hundreds of years. If they were wounded or they had an injury, it took them an incredibly long time to heal. But basically, that they were working with our government in some capacity, which I thought was incredible. I mean, either this guy is completely out of his mind, which I don't think is the case. He seems like a very intelligent individual, very credible individual in just how he articulates his story. He's a nuclear physicist too, I believe. He's a pretty intelligent, grounded person.
Yeah.
And just an incredible story. I was amazed. That's how I got introduced. I saw that documentary as well and was just very intrigued on that whole subject. And then I found out that the document dump that Snowden released, that there was information on the tall whites. And I'm like, what? Like, this is crazy. And like our government interaction with these beings called the tall whites.
And just to clarify, the way he describes the tall whites aren't like I imagined them originally. I imagined like a tall gray with a long neck and, you know.
Right.
But he describes them as human looking.
Yes.
With paper white skin.
Yes. And really thin hair. He said they have very thin hair, kind of blondish, almost whitish hair. Yeah. And very, very skinny, very almost frail.
Yeah.
So,
and he described them, the reason they took so long to heal, because they're not from this planet, you know, and they're not used to our environment. So even a bee sting could be deadly to them.
Yes.
And his testimony is incredible. He talks about, so this was in the 60s. He said before he left, they were in talks with the government. There was a series of uninhabited planets that they basically handed over to us or gave us access to, and asked our government, our military, if we could build outposts on those planets for them, and in exchange for whatever technology or whatever else they were doing with us. Now, if they were planning that in the 60s, this was before we ever went to the moon.
Yeah.
That would tell you that they couldn't have made that agreement unless they had technology to get to those planets.
Right.
And like, even in the documentary, he says he wonders what progress was ever made on that project. Right. And I would not be surprised if that's exactly what happened, and that they followed through with it.
Yeah, it's just mind blowing. It really is. I got to the point in my book where it kind of started writing itself. I would just come across some information, and then it would lead me down another rabbit hole. My section on the ET races was really inspired by my friend Charles, because he was a ufologist too, and he had sent me a paper on that subject, and he talked a little bit about the grays and the tall whites and the reptilians, and I never really researched that. And I thought, wow, I'm really going to look into this. And it was fun for me, and it was a way for me to kind of honor him too, because I referenced some of his works.
And right. And another thing I learned from your book, I might have heard this in the past, but I completely forgot about it, was this lost city of reptilians under Los Angeles.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? Can
you tell that story? Because that's actually really fascinating.
Yeah. That was an article I came across. I think it was back in the 1930s, a gentleman who had developed some X-ray machine, and he had, I guess, got the information from a Hopi Chief Greenleaf, that basically said, yeah, there's all these tunnels under Los Angeles, and it's inhabited. They were constructed by these reptilians that came from Mexico that had to flee their area, and they used some kind of strange chemicals to carve these caves and caverns, and they have a city underneath Los Angeles. And this guy was so intrigued that he used his X-ray machine and claimed that he had mapped out these tunnels underneath the city, and actually was working with the city to do this expedition. And he started drilling down. I don't know how far down they got, maybe 10, 20 feet. And then they ran out of money and they couldn't go any further. But obviously, I mean, he had this firm belief that there were these reptilian city underneath Los Angeles. And obviously it's in the native tradition as well. In fact, the Anasazi talk about a reptilian being that showed up to their people. It was evil, and it was teaching their medicine men how to practice witchcraft, which basically brought their civilization down. And then it led to some cannibalism, and they were practicing this witchcraft, and it opened up portals. And guess what came out of the portals? Giants. And the giants started tearing everything up, killing and eating people. And then I'm thinking, wow, this sounds almost like the book of Enoch, when Enoch said that the giants were running around destroying everything, drinking blood and this and that. And I was like, wow, this sounds kind of similar to that.
I think the Anasazi, I think that's the story told of what happened to the people of Chaco Canyon.
It is that they left because of the giants. Archaeologists will say, oh, they left because of climate change, because of the droughts or whatever. But in my book, I reference a Native American guide in that book for that area. And he says, if you were to ask my great grandfather, he would say it's not climate change that drove him out. It was the giants. And that's why the early archaeologists would go into these structures, these pueblos, and they would find like really good supplies and stuff that had just been abandoned. You know, it's like, why would they leave all this good stuff?
Why would they leave all their stuff? It doesn't make
all their stuff. Yeah. If it was climate change or whatever, they would have still brought that stuff with them. But if they were under duress, if they were under attack and they were being slaughtered, well, it's like, let's just take what we can carry on our back and get out of here.
Right.
Right. Going back to the LA city of reptilians or tunnels. Not only did he claim to depict tunnels with his X-ray machine, but he said he found caverns with deposits of gold too, correct?
Gold tablets, apparently, that had information on them about our whole history of the human civilization, our race.
Well,
so it's knowledge based too. It just wasn't treasure based. It was knowledge based. But you'll hear these stories, the Great Sphinx, the left paw of the Sphinx. There's supposedly a hidden chamber there that had the records, the ancient records of our civilization. You hear Graham Hancock's, his theory is the pyramids were built, some of these big structures were built as repositories for this ancient knowledge that was either destroyed or it was lost or it was moved somewhere else.
Yeah, relocated.
Relocated. Yeah.
Under the Vatican.
Oh, yeah. Imagine how much stuff they have.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
miles and miles of.
If anything is true that we've heard from what's under the Vatican, I mean, it's that in itself will change history.
Right. I'm going to get into that in my second book when I get into the Sardinia on the giants there, because I already in my research, I've uncovered people that live on Sardinia that the church actually hired to do excavations, and they found giant skeletons, and they would bring them into the church and leave them. And then they would come the next day and the bones are gone. The bones are gone. So
really,
actual people that claim they were doing excavations and found these things.
Well, looking forward to that second book.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Going back to the Chaco Canyon one last time, and then we'll start wrapping this up. But
sure.
I don't know if you've ever heard of the Wingmakers. So there was a cave near Chaco Canyon, it's undisclosed, where they allegedly found a bunch of alien artifacts. And apparently these artifacts were left by like an ancient group of time travelers. And it wasn't just this cave, but like a number of caves around the world. I don't actually know the true story. I don't have all the details, but something like that. And I find it interesting that it was near Chaco Canyon. And
very interesting.
Clearly that was built by an advanced civilization.
That's very fascinating. I have not heard of that. And you relaying that to me also triggers a memory too, getting back to the Nazca mummies. How those came to be known was the grave robbers brought them forward to an archaeologist, and they thought they were so important. Like, it's like, instead of putting these on the black market, making some money, we feel these are so important that humanity needs to know about them. Right, and the head of the Hoqueros, the group of grave robbers that gave him the mummies, he said he knows where there's a whole underground tunnel complex with tons more of these mummies, and who knows what else is in there.
Really?
Right. And well, that also, going back to the Wingmakers in that cave, it wasn't just artifacts, but it was tablets that were found with information, and all that stuff is on the Wingmakers website, actually.
I'm going to have to check that out. I had not heard of that.
There's a bunch of different versions of the Wingmakers website, but people, because it's been updated over time, but depending on who you talk to, they recommend going to the original one that hasn't been updated because none of the information's been tampered with. So I'll send you that link, and
I would love it.
I know I'll have to put it in the description too, because people listening are like, I want to look it up.
Absolutely. That might go my second book. There's some more information right there.
There's a book's worth of information on that website. And so this guy who claimed to work for this group broke free, and he did a few interviews with this lady before he knew part of the deal was, if you quit your position for this secret government he was working for, I think he said they would literally blank slate you, mind wipe you. So before he quit, he knew he could no longer participate in the cover up. Before he quit, he went and found a journalist and did a few interviews with her, told her everything, and there's no way to contact her. Even on the website said you cannot, there's no contact information at all. So
interesting.
Whatever happened to this guy, if he really did get blank slated or what, who knows? But it's an incredible story.
Oh, I'm eager to look forward, dig into that. Thank you so much. Yeah. Right. And that's amazing. The synergy, the exchange, of knowledge, and, just like what you said, I had no idea about that story, and now it's something I'm going to look into, and who knows where that's going to go.
Talk about, you know how I found out about the Wingmakers? I had a dream that I was part of a group of time travelers, and I was called the Wingmakers.
That's wild.
And then I stumbled across a Dr. Sala interview where the guy was talking about it. And then something else came into my awareness. It just kept showing up to where I finally just had to go read the whole, website. So
incredible.
It's interesting how we're guided to this stuff.
Yes.
Let people know how they can find your book, where they can find it.
Absolutely. If you'd like to purchase my book, you can find it at bookbaby.com. Because I'm a self-published author, BookBaby does an awesome job at really supporting self-published authors. So I would encourage you to go there to get it. Also, you could find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble as well. I do have a website, theancientgiants.com, and it has more information, a little bit of information on my background and my research that I'm doing.
Great.
Awesome.
We'll put all those links below.
Yeah, we'll put the links.
Guys, go check out this book. Hold it up, Aaron, so they can see what it looks like. Get it a little closer. It's really, if you enjoyed this interview, you'll enjoy the book. It's awesome. There's no doubt in my mind.
Super good. Yes.
Thank you guys so much. What an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thanks to you both, and thanks to your audience for having me on. I could sit here and talk to you guys for hours, easily. All this time, it seems like we've been talking for 5 minutes.
Right.
Exactly. Same to you, man.
And
thank you so much.
There's no doubt in my mind we'll do this again for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, especially, you got another book coming out, so there's plenty to talk about. We could do another episode just on this book alone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, you guys. Right. What a pleasure. Much love and peace to you both, and happy New Year coming up, and hopefully it's going to be a good year, much better than what we had, right?
It's going to be exactly what it's supposed to be.
What it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you, Floyd, for joining us.
Thank you, man.
This was a lot of fun.
It's been a pleasure.
Guys, if you want to come to our conference, come hang out with us, grab a ticket. Book your lodging. The lodging's filling up quick, so if you want to stay on site, I recommend doing that soon. It's filling up, so we hope to see you there. Tickets are available at journeytotruthcon.com. Hope you can make it. Good night, everybody. Until next time, have a great evening.